So I'm going to stop my video. We have a minute and you'll be live soon. Okay?
Sound good? Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Scott Asai. I'll be doing the workshop entitled Soft Skills Get Hard Results. And just so you kind of have an idea of what I do normally, what I do is I help tech companies close the soft skills gap. And what that does is it helps maximize performance and retention at your company. So I am a keynote speaker, and I actually did a TED Talk in late February in Hawaii, right before everything shut down. And it was entitled Saving Soft Skills from Extinction. It was a great experience. I do miss speaking on stage right now, but we're in a virtual world and we're all trying to do our best. So today I want to start with some context, because you may be asking yourself, I'm going to a tech conference here, and what are we talking about soft skills for? What does that have to do with anything? Well, I'm glad that you asked. Here's where we're going to start. At a point, you were hired for a technical role. So on your resume, you were brought in because of your hard skills, maybe a certification, maybe some type of program that you knew, right? Well, if you do a good job, then over time, what's going to happen is you're going to get promoted, right? And the natural progression in terms of promotion means that you go from a technical role to a middle management or a leadership role. Now, at that role, what got you the promotion skill-wise is not actually going to serve you too well when you move up. So when you go to a leadership role, now your job isn't to be necessarily the best at making widgets or the best coder or the best developer. Your job as a leader is to get the best out of the people on the team that you're managing now. So that's where soft skills come in handy, because now all of a sudden, in order to get the most out of people, you got to understand how to motivate them. You got to understand how to gain trust. You got to understand when to push buttons and when to back off, right? And these are things that you necessarily are not taught in the classroom. You can read a book about it, but every person is different. So you're going to have to respond to those types of things. You're going to have to get to know people. And in order to do that, you got to be relational. And to be relational, you have to get your soft skills in order. So that's where we're going to start today. And the reality is that if you think back to the last time that you left a job, right? They say that people don't leave companies, they leave managers. So I'd argue to say that micromanagers actually cost the company more in ROI than any other position overall, right? I'm sure we could all name a boss or manager who was a little bit overbearing that made us consider leaving, or maybe that's why you left. I know I've experienced that myself, and it's not a fun experience because you're there to do a job, and the last thing you need is to feel like your manager doesn't trust you or doesn't give you the authority to be able to do your work, right? And so you kind of feel like, hey, I'm working for you, yet I feel like you're working against me. And so that's where I think soft skills really come into play. So whether you're an aspiring manager or a current manager, soft skills are going to serve you. And the nice thing about soft skills too is that they transcend really all industries. So if you decide to leave the tech industry and go to a different industry, soft skills are going to be something that are going to serve you for the rest of your life. And I'd argue to say that as technology evolves and continues to grow, soft skills actually become more and more important, more and more valuable. So today, I hope you're going to enjoy this talk we're going to have. I'm going to focus on three things. We're going to talk about communication, we're going to talk about leadership, and we're going to talk about emotional intelligence. So as I go into each point, we're going to start with communication. I'd like you to actually type in the chat. Some of you are on LoudSwarm. I think some of you also are in the Slack room. And I'm going to have Ravi help me. He doesn't have to come on screen for this one. But if you get any questions, you get any definitions, I want to say, please maybe yell them out. Ravi, that's for you auditorily. If not, I'm going to move on. But I want to start with, how do you define communication? So whether you're on Loudswarm or you're on Skype, type in the definition of what is communication. And I'll pause for 30 seconds or so to see if we get any answers. All right, we'll go about 5 more seconds. So the definition of communication to me is exchanging information. Okay, now that sounds really, really simple, but what I do want to emphasize is that how you communicate matters just as much as what you're communicating. Okay, let me say that again. How you communicate matters as much as what you're communicating. Okay, it's the reason why nowadays, when we're not really seeing people in person for the most part, that text messages, emails get misinterpreted, right? I send something, you read it, you maybe read it in a certain way. Maybe I could have been a little bit more tactful. Possibly someone gets offended. Maybe they read it wrong, right? From your perspective, maybe different from my perspective, right? There's a lot of things that could sort of happen, right? And so how we communicate things really, really matters. And so when the next time you're writing an email, the next time you're texting someone, you know, depending on the relationship, make sure that you proofread it. Make sure that you look at how it sounds. Try to put yourself in the other person's shoes. How are they going to interpret it, right? And those are things that we can put the pause button on, because before you hit send, you want to make sure that you actually know what you're talking about. You also want to make sure that you're saying it in a way that the person understands, right? Communication is a lot more about how the person is receiving the message that you're saying rather than how you're saying it. You know, and you have to think about those types of things before you do it, because the last thing you want is to waste time and waste energy on miscommunicating something. So I think what's really key here is the idea of active listening. So instead of talk about active listening, I'm actually going to ask Ravi to come on, and we're going to do sort of a demonstration for you. Because it's one thing to talk about active listening and say, you know, what is that? And I've heard of that. I read it in a book. I've read a blog about it or something like that. But it's another thing to actually experience it, okay? So let me lay sort of the scenario right now, and Ravi and I are going to have a little conversation. And I hope you are able to observe what's going on and see active listening in action. So let's think of a work scenario, all right? And what we're going to do here is I'm going to do a demonstration about active listening. And the situation here is I am Ravi's manager, and Ravi's under my team, okay? And he's telling me about a situation he's having a problem with. And so he's going to be sort of part venting, part asking for a resource or help with it. And my job as a manager is to make sure that I'm active listening, okay? After we do this, I'll pause it, and then we'll sort of talk about it a little bit so we can unpack it. But I think it's really important for you guys to see it live rather than just hear about it or read about it, because it's something that it's difficult to explain unless you sort of see it. So let's cue scene. Hey, Ravi, how's it going?
Hi, Scott. How are you?
Good, good. So I know you asked if we could get together and meet. It seems like maybe you were having a challenge. Would love to hear more about it.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. Anything that I can help you with, or anything that maybe is frustrating you right now?
Yeah, I need some more help with my project.
Okay, okay. Can you tell me a little bit more about your project?
Yeah, we have to deliver a new feature for a client, and we don't have enough time to meet the deadline.
Okay, okay. So if you had more time, do you feel like you could do a better quality job with your team?
Yes.
Okay. What I can do is I could try to talk to the client and ask if we could sort of push back the deadline. Obviously, that would be optimal, right?
Yes, that would be ideal.
Okay, okay. Now, in case we can't, let's sort of brainstorm some ideas in terms of if they're not able to do that. So hypothetically, let's just say that they can't do that. What are some resources I could offer you through other teammates or maybe other departments that could sort of assist you just in case that this client is hard set on that deadline?
Yeah, we would need an experienced software engineer to help build that feature.
Okay, okay, that sounds good. Yeah. So optimally, we'll push the deadline back. If not, um, definitely to get you some help. That would probably be best, right?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, cool. So, of those two options, obviously one's better than the other, but worst case scenario, we give you some help. Do you think that would do the job?
Yes,
Okay,
definitely.
great, great. So yeah, let me work on that and get back to you by tomorrow, and hopefully we'll have an answer and everything will be settled.
Thank
So
you.
great. Okay, we can cut the scene right now. So thank you so much, Robbie, for volunteering. So in an active listening scenario, okay, and this has happened probably if you've had a one-on-one with your manager, where a lot of times as someone who's having an issue as an employee, all you really want from your manager is you just want them to shut their mouth and open their ears, right? You want to vent to them, you want to tell them about your frustrations. You don't necessarily want to look weak to them like you can't handle it, but if it is a situation where maybe there's a deadline you can't meet or you just don't have all the resources to have, you don't want to be fearful that the person that is above you is going to give you a hard time, right? So I know we probably don't have the time to do this right now, but normally I would ask people to, you know, come on screen and say, what is it that they saw? What did you observe? Okay. So I'm going to do my best to hopefully communicate what I was trying to do intentionally. And hopefully Ravi agrees too. So I made sure that, in this situation, obviously we're virtually meeting, but I'm trying to make eye contact. So I'm definitely trying to stare at the camera. I want to make sure that I'm picking up sort of his vibe. At the beginning part, when I asked him how he's doing and what his situation was, he was kind of short with it. So I wanted to ask more, right? In active listening, what you want to do is you want to ask clarifying questions because I don't want to assume that I know what his problem is. And the other thing is too is when you're active listening, what you're doing is that you're turning off that part of your brain that's trying to fix everything. And our brains are naturally geared towards wanting to fix things, and so when you're listening and you're trying to fix things, your eyes sort of wander, you're kind of looking around the room, you're not really paying attention to the person, and that person knows it. They know that you're just basically waiting for them to stop talking so you can start talking. But a lot of times, sometimes a manager may come in and try to fix a problem, and you're as an employee, you're like, wait a second, we're not even talking about the same thing now, right? So to me, in order to move forward, you have to acknowledge the person that you're listening first and you're hearing what they're saying, just to make sure that you are actually trying to solve the same problem. Because a lot of times, what happens is that there's a lot of fixing and assuming and bad communication going on. And when that happens, then the person leaves more frustrated as if they never had the meeting in the first place. And quite frankly, that's usually where things start. It starts with that conversation, initial conversation with your manager or boss. And if that doesn't go well, it's kind of one of those things where we sort of hold with us. And then we're never able to fully flush that out. And then we're never able to get on the right track. So hopefully you were able to kind of see a little bit of the importance of active listening. This is just one aspect of communication that I believe is really, really important. But it's sort of this first step that you've got to get right. People think of communication as me talking, right? Well, communication is a two-way street. And if you don't understand how to listen first, you're not going to be a good communicator, point blank. And that is under your control. And a lot of things in life are not under our control. So if that's one thing that's under your control, you want to make sure that you grasp well. Communication at a certain point, even though Ravi was asking me for my help, honestly, at the beginning part, advice is really optional. If I'm trying to lay on advice too much, he's going to feel like I'm not listening to him, right? So I want you to know that sometimes advice is premature and sometimes it's not even what they want, quite frankly. So the goal in communication, especially in active listening, is to make sure that you're listening for clarity because ultimately what you want to do as a good communicator is you actually want to help ask the right questions so that the person that you're talking to solves their own problem. And you know why? It's because that gives the person responsibility and ownership for the answer. It's just like if someone tells you to do something, and you do it and you're like, well, I did it because Scott told me to do it, right? Versus if I have a conversation with you and you realize, you know what, I should really do that, right? That's your idea. That's your initiative you're taking. That's your motivation you're using, right? And therefore, quite frankly, the result is probably going to be that much better because you're committed to it. It's not someone telling you and you're being externally motivated by it. It's something internally you realize and you say, hey, I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to take ownership for this. It's my job to do that. So that's communication. All right. And once again, if I didn't mention it already, we're going to do an extended Q&A time towards the end. And so I'm going to get through 2 more topics, and then I'm going to leave enough time to make sure that I can answer any questions that you have. So I appreciate you hanging in there. Number 2 is leadership. Okay. So I realize that we're on a lag. I kind of forgot that. So I'm not going to ask you to define what leadership is, but feel free to type it into Slack if you want to. I'm not going to wait this time. So leadership is one of those things where everybody has an opinion on it. Okay. So my definition may be different than your definition, but what I'll say that I think is a pretty objective definition of leadership is getting things done through people. Okay. Leadership is getting things done through people. Pretty simple, right? What I think that people get wrong about leadership actually has less to do with a technical skill or a hard skill, like we talked about, maybe when you got hired initially at a company, but it has to do with a soft skill or a different and new skill. Okay. And this is something that you don't necessarily learn in college. You don't learn through the workplace sometimes. This is something that you sort of observe with other people. Maybe you have seen it in others and you can't put a finger on it, but you understand that the leaders that you feel are effective grasp this idea of soft skills. They grasp this idea of leadership and they do it well. And you ask, is that just innate? And the answer is for some people, yes. Some people, they do have more potential in it. But for the most part, most leaders are made. And that means that they work on it, they build on it. So let's talk about something that you can do as an aspiring or current leader that can improve your leadership skills when it comes to soft skills. So I will give you some context again. I worked at an online test prep company about 5 years ago, and I worked there for about a year. And my role was as a faculty manager. And essentially, what that was is I managed 30 full-time tutors remotely. And so, ironically, no one could have predicted COVID, but at the time, I never met any of my employees. My job was basically to meet with them a half an hour per week just to check in, and then we would have 2 teams of 15 split up and have an hour meeting. So what I did was I thought to myself, I want to get to know these people. And so what I did is I built a profile, and I have a little bit of an advantage because I am a coach too. So I have a sort of knack of asking these questions and a knack of being able to understand people and identify what their talents are. So I had, say about 10 questions or so. And the first time that we met, I sort of just went down that list, right? I wanted to know obviously things like their name and their hobbies, their family situation. I wanted to know maybe some of their career goals, right? So as I went down the list, one of the last questions that I asked, and it ended up being one of the most powerful questions, was how can I support you? And when I asked that question to everybody, a lot of people paused when I asked it. They asked for clarification, like, what do you mean? Can you give me some examples, right? What I found is that it was a very disarming question. All the other questions are like hobby type things, like things you can answer pretty easily. But when I asked the question, how can I support you? I think it kind of caught people off guard. Like they didn't really know how to respond to it. And here's the reason why I asked that question. Because in a work situation, chaos is going to happen. Things are going to happen out of your control. And when they do happen, you have to ask yourself, how do I handle it? Right? What I wanted to know as our manager was, even though I couldn't physically help them, what I really wanted to know is, what do you want me to do in that situation? Okay. Things are going to get crazy. And when they do get crazy, how do you want me to help? Do you want me to back off? Do you want me to offer help? Do you want me to check in? Do you want me just to listen to you vent? Okay. Whatever it is, I want to know, because I don't use a cookie cutter approach in leadership. in terms of, what worked for him is going to work for her, or what worked for her is going to work for him. Like that to me is, people don't like to be treated the same way, even though we want to talk about equality and fairness and all that stuff. When someone understands how to treat you because of your unique personality, we feel like we're heard. We feel like we're valued, right? So in leadership, what I wanted to know is, I wanted to know, how do I respond to you in a tense moment when things are stressful? Because that's going to give me a sort of a way in to understand, hey, this person wants this and that person wants that, right? And so that was probably one of the most valuable questions I asked. And at the time, I was just putting together a list, but I realized after I was starting to ask people, that ended up being probably the most important question I asked, because I was able to use that. Because everyone's going to have a bad day. Everyone's going to have something that's going to happen to them that's not going to be favorable. So getting the answer to those questions was sort of getting a cheat sheet or peek into the person's personality. So when things went wrong, I didn't have to guess how to respond to that person. I could get right into it. Okay? So that's why it's really important. Leadership to me is about serving. It's about showing versus telling. We've always had those bosses who say one thing then do the other thing, right? We're in a political race right now with an election, right? And we hear a lot of people say things and they don't do things, right? And quite frankly, I'd rather people talk less and do more. I'm sure you probably agree with me too, right? What I'm saying is that true leaders, they really think about this stuff. They think about how to say things. They think about what the person who's receiving the message is going to do with it, or how they're going to take it, right? Leadership is not easy because it's not something that's predictable. We can't say A plus B equals C, because that doesn't work, you know? And I think that's the hard part, is that if people knew how hard leadership was, they may not aspire to do it. And that's okay, because not everybody is cut out for it. And that's not saying that you can't be really great at your job. Okay, that's just saying that in a leadership role, your job really is to be kind of a therapist to some degree. And not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody wants to get interrupted while they're doing their work. Not everybody wants to put out fires at work. Not everybody wants to be a mediator between two people who are having conflict, right? So understand what you're getting into, and understand that the best leaders in each industry are probably really, really strong at soft skills for the most part. Okay. I kind of want you to think about your favorite leader. Who is that person, right? If you can put a name to a face, right? My guess would be that that leader did whatever they could at a certain point to gain your trust, right? I'm not sure what they did, okay? But they were able to gain that trust. And when they were able to gain that trust, right? Then you're willing to do more for that person, right? Not a ton of us are going to be overly motivated by a simple raise or promotion, right? Those things are all nice, okay? But that's kind of the carrot and stick approach. What we're really impressed by, and the reason why people leave companies, is the loyalty nowadays really is not to companies. In ways, it's loyalty to yourself, but ultimately, too, it's also loyalty to your manager, right? If you feel like the person above you is giving you career opportunities, is really pushing you and challenging you, but is also someone you can talk to and sort of be a role model or mentor to, right? You may get an offer somewhere else that's a little bit more money. And if it's a lot more money, hey, maybe you take it, right? But if it's a little bit more money, is the grass really going to be greener on the other side? Because your manager is someone that you're always interacting with, right? And if that relationship is good, hey, honestly, from experience, it's valuable. You don't want to just give that up. So think about those things. In leadership, if the goal really is to get to know the person, to build that trust, because when you do build that trust, you're able to say those tough things. And a lot of times, I'd like to argue that the reason why we as employees don't take things well from our manager is because the relationship is all messed up. If you have a tight relationship with your manager, he or she, right? When they say tough things to you, you don't take it personal, because you believe that they have the best interests out for you, right? And so you may not like it. I don't think people like to hear negative feedback or criticism, right? But sometimes it's needed, right? Do you want to get better at what you do, or do you want someone to fluff you up all the time, right? We all like to be encouraged, but we also want someone who's honest, right? And we're not doing something right or we could be doing something better, I'd rather be told, right? Learn to get over it. Toughen up a little bit. Don't worry so much about, oh, so and so criticized me about this or where that. How do you expect to get better? How do you really expect to improve if you're not willing to take that type of stuff? And I'm saying that great leaders understand that if they build that relationship, they've earned the respect to be able to say those tough things, and for the person they're saying it to not take it too harshly. Because understand it from a leader's perspective, those type of conversations are never comfortable to go into. I don't care how mean or disrespectful you think maybe your boss may be at a certain point. Those types of things are hard. No one goes into a situation and is like, oh, I'm looking forward to criticizing someone. You may feel like they come off that way, but trust me, I don't think anyone goes in a situation and feels that way. So to me, as a leader, your ultimate goal really is to build trust. And that's something that probably people don't talk about. But you know, leaders who understand that are just more effective. You don't have to actually be the smartest person in the group to be the leader. You just have to be smart enough to surround yourself with people who can do great work, and you put them in positions to succeed. Okay? So that's leadership. Now we're going to move on to the last one, which is emotional intelligence. And this is a tricky one because we hear a lot about emotional intelligence, EQ, right? So let's talk about defining it right now before we get too confused. So my TED talk I did on soft skills, this is one area that I focused in on a lot. And there's some statistics I want to share with you that give you some perspective so you understand what's going on here. So emotional intelligence is really the ability to manage your emotions with others, okay? Your ability to manage your emotions with others, right? So here's some stats on it. There is a book called Emotional Intelligence at Work, and it's written by Daniel Goleman, who really is kind of one of the first people who brought emotional intelligence out. I want to say in the 70s or 80s. And so here's some stats to work with, because I'm sure a lot of you who are in the tech field, value data, right? So the stats on this are really staggering. So Goldman believes that 90% of what moves a person up the success ladders is emotional intelligence, which is a soft skill, right? He also argues that people who have high EQ or high emotional intelligence usually have 2 times as much of it in terms of people who are like at an average role in their position, right? So high achievers versus run of the mill sort of average. The people who are high achievers usually have about 2 times as much or twice as much EQ as people who are at like an average level, I guess. But what's even more telling is as you move up that corporate ladder, senior executives tend to have about 4 times as much EQ. Okay. So to me, right there, it says that the value right there is very clear. Okay, you can argue it or whatever like that, but based on statistics, it makes it pretty clear that EQ is important. Okay, here's the application for you. Okay, great leaders in any industry, okay, are self-aware, and what that means is that they understand what their strengths and weaknesses are. They know what they're good at. They also know what they're not good at. And sometimes we think, well, what's so good about knowing what our weaknesses are? Well, a couple things. Number one, it helps you understand where you need help. It helps you understand what your blind spots are, right? But it also clues you into who you need to partner up with, who needs to complement your skill set, right? If you're a manager or recruiter or someone who could bring other people on, you right away understand that sometimes the people that you conflict with are actually the people that you need on your team more. That people who are similar to you, although you may get along, you may end up butting heads with because you're always trying to do the same thing, right? So that takes a lot of EQ. It takes a lot of being able to manage your ego. It takes a lot of being able to not respond emotionally, to take a step back when you're upset and respond appropriately when you have your emotions in check, right? And sometimes we don't think about these things. We don't think about EQ at work because we just sort of just respond, right? But if you can catch yourself and you can be a lot more self-aware, then the results that you're going to get from working with other people is probably going to be pretty good. because you're tapping into being aware of just not yourself, but other people. But I will say it does start with being self-aware first, and then sort of pouring that into other people. Here's an example, okay? How many times have you subconsciously kind of sabotaged yourself, okay? How many times have you sort of analyzed your self-talk, okay? And I'm gonna give you an example from my personal life that hopefully can give you some perspective and maybe even give you some ideas about how you can sort of turn this around, okay? So it wasn't until about 6 or 7 years ago that I actually got comfortable doing public speaking. Okay. And if I sort of back up in my career, I've probably been on a public stage for 20, 25 years. Okay. Now, as someone who stepped into leadership roles pretty early on in life, um, pre-college, there's situations where I have to speak in front of people. Okay. And did I do them? I did. Did I do them happily? Not really. Did I do them reluctantly? Yes. Okay. But it wasn't until about 6 or 7 years ago that a light bulb went out. And this is the light bulb that went off for me. The thing is I was like, the reason why I'm not a good public speaker is because I tell myself I'm not. So what I was saying to myself was speaking is just not my thing. Okay. And what that did is it made me feel not very confident, right? And so what that would result in is when I would perform, I would be nervous and I'd be overanalyzing things and I would sort of stumble on my words. I wasn't very clear and I didn't look like I really wanted to be there, right? So if you're thinking of that in a linear sense, what that really is my thought was that I said to myself, speaking is not my thing, right? It made me feel not very confident. And the action was that I didn't perform very well. Okay. So thought equals push to feeling, push to action. Okay. Here's the reason why I'm telling you that is because it wasn't until I changed that I statement from speaking is not my thing to a positive one, which is I want to be a great speaker. When I say that, then I started to feel more hopeful. I started to feel motivated. I started to feel inspired, right? What action did that cause me to? It caused me to watch TED Talks. It caused me to go to events and really hone in on speakers. It made me watch comedians. It made me watch people who I respected who were good public speakers, right? And I sort of broke them down. Now, did I copy them? No, I didn't. Because I'll tell you right now, when it comes to public speaking, you do not want to emulate someone. You can take bits and pieces from things, right? But you want to be authentic. You want to create your own voice. You want to identify that and then unlock it and bring it out. Okay. So the reason why I share this thoughts, feeling, actions equation is because with emotional intelligence, a lot of times you have to understand how to control and turn your negative thoughts into positive ones. Because if you don't, it affects the way you feel and it affects the way you perform, right? And even though we only get judged for the most part for how we perform, understand that there's always a starting point. And that starting point is the thought process, right? And that's where the emotional intelligence comes in. Are you able to wait a second, pump the brakes and realize if I'm thinking negatively, then I'm probably going to perform that way, right? It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, essentially, right? And so if you can stop that process, quite frankly, that is a huge win right there. Okay. So I'd encourage you, if you want to boost your EQ, if you want to boost your soft skills, you want to boost your emotional intelligence, start with that scenario, right? In a situation where analyze your self-talk and understand what you're saying to yourself and then try to flip that into a positive statement because that's really going to affect you a lot. Okay. Emotional intelligence starts with you, right? And when we think about things, when you're observing someone, when you're trying to be emotional intelligent while you're observing that person, you're observing, you're reflecting, you're evaluating, and then you repeat the cycle. Okay. And that's really a way that you become a lot more solid when it comes to EQ. Using a leadership example, the reality is that 50%, and this is a little bit scary, 50% of a manager's time is spent dealing with interpersonal conflict, right? So once again, here goes the thing. When it comes to leadership, sometimes if we knew what we were getting into, we wouldn't sign up for it, Okay. Now, I'm not trying to push you away from it. I'm just letting you know a lot of times when we step into roles, we like to know what to expect, right? And so there's a reason why, when you think about your favorite leader, that they probably had high IQ, they were good communicators, they were good leaders, is because they understood these things, right? And once again, it's not something that you can always just open a book for or read a a blog article or even watch a video on. These are things that you have to actually practice, right? Like for myself, when someone asked me, how'd you become a better public speaker? I was like, I volunteered to public speak. How did it go? It didn't go very well at the beginning part, right? How do you get better? Well, I had to videotape myself. I had to watch it. Did I cringe watching it? Yeah, I still do to some degree, right? But I got more comfortable with it and I saw my performance get better. But ultimately, what really helped me is mentally, I'm a lot more confident in public speaking situations. And I don't know how much that shows, okay? But it matters to me. And because it matters to me, it affects the way that I present myself. So I really feel like that is really, really important, okay? The goal of emotional intelligence is, as you increase your self-awareness, you're able to build EQ, sorry. So focus on the things that you can control, okay? So in summary, let's talk a little bit about what we learned today in soft skills, and we'll be able to interact a little bit through the questions, okay? My summary for the 3 points in a very simple statement is that soft skills are learned and mastered in the real world, not in the classroom, okay? So I'm not bashing college, okay? I'm not bashing the classroom. I'm not saying you can't learn things in there, okay? But there's certain things like soft skills that you can only learn by doing, by practice, right? So I'm not saying that the head skills and the hard skills and the intelligence part doesn't matter. What I am saying though is that if you want to get better and you see the importance now why soft skills are crucial to your career, especially when it comes to advancement, understand that practice may not make perfect, but practice definitely makes better. And if you don't practice in real life, you don't role play, you don't actually physically go out there and do it, you're not going to get better at it. And that's one thing I think that people need to know. They need to hear that early on, because we could sit and gain all this content because there's just an overload of content out there that's accessible, right? You can learn anything you want to on YouTube, right? You can Google whatever information you want. Okay. When it comes to something like soft skills, you gotta like physically go out and do it. You want to be a better communicator? Start emailing better, start texting better, start doing virtual meetings better, start public speaking better, right? There's not a way around it. It's kind of like, if hard skills are like a resume and that's what got you the interview, when you get into that interview, your soft skills are exposed. And to me, the only way you get a second interview is if you do a decent job at your soft skills. If you don't, that's it. Game over. You can lie in your resume, you can't lie in an interview. Well, technically, I guess you can, but you're probably going to get caught eventually. So don't try it. It's not a good strategy. Okay. So yeah, that's pretty much the content piece of the workshop. I hope that's something that you benefited from. I hope too that even though maybe you came in wondering like, I'm not really sure how soft skills are going to, help my career or how they're going to, be plugged into situations. But I thought about this and I speak primarily to tech conferences and tech companies about soft skills. And the reason why is because I see it as something that's important in any industry. But the reason why it's important in the tech industry is because humans power technology, right? And when we talk about scale, yeah, we could do things that automate and things like that, right? But as you grow as a company, as you scale as a company, you hire more people. And now, quite frankly, you have more people problems. It's much easier to manage things when it's smaller. But as you grow and you scale up, you hire more people, and now there's more people problems. And that's where you need soft skills. And the stronger the soft skills, the stronger managers and leaders that you bring into your organization who have those types of things, not only are you going to have less turnover, but you're going to be able to really maximize the talent on your team because they understand sort of how to manage people and how to get the best out of people. Okay. So, Ravi, would love to hear any questions that come up. I'm sort of
Yes,
scanning through the Slack chat, but I'm going to sort of count on you.
Yes, Scott. There's a question asked by Lauren,
Huh?
and her question is, you said something in your intro about soft skills improving retention. Do you have a reference for that?
Yeah, so with all the research that I've done online, what I found is that you know soft skills are really important because the retention piece is something that executives, recruiters, HR really cares about. What I found is that it really comes down to the reason why the retention piece is important is because, for example, when we hire someone, right, and the training that goes into it, you know, you are spending as a company anywhere from to fire someone and hire someone new, you're actually spending 150 to 250% of that person's salary that you fired to hire and train someone else up again. And so when it comes to retention numbers, it's really, really key. That's why, a lot of times we ask like, well, why does it take so long to like interview someone? Why do I have to go through like 7 interviews to get a job? And I do think that's a little bit excessive. I think after like one or two, you should probably have a good sense if that person is going to be a good fit or not. Okay. But I think where we get lazy as companies a lot of times is that after we get them into the spot, right? When they start working, you really need to put a lot more emphasis into the orientation and the build in terms of like the professional development and stuff like that from there on out, because that's going to really determine how well skill wise and they're going to get up to par so that they can sort of stay there longer. So the soft skills part comes in handy because people who have really, that stat I gave you about the 2 times more important from a top performer than an average one, is because people who have stronger soft skills are going to have honestly a better chance of sticking it out because they understand how to get along with people. And people who don't are probably going to be people who you see red flags within the interview process that you probably should really think about whether you really want to invest in them. And ultimately, that's going to be a cultural fit. But really, too, if they have strong soft skills, they're going to be able to move around the company a lot easier.
Thanks, Scott. Lauren had a second question,
Sure.
and is, how can you share your soft skills in a performance review or in a LinkedIn profile?
Good question. So I will say that hard skills are more marketable, at least on paper. So when you're doing like a resume, you're doing a LinkedIn profile, whatever like that, I do encourage people to list like technical skills, things that are very measurable, right? The tricky part with soft skills is that if you put something like, I'm a good team player, or I play well with people, or whatever, like things like that, I'm a good communicator. Those are things that you can list on there, but quite frankly, where they're really going to come out is in an interview session. Also, in terms of when you're touching base with someone, your cover letter, your email correspondence, phone interviews, Zoom interviews, eventually in person when that sort of comes back. I think soft skills are the reason why soft skills are more transferable amongst different industries is because it's something that's valuable in every industry. It's something that you may not be able to get hired or get brought in for an interview with, okay? But when you're in the interview, those are things that you're going to get judged on. So um, that may not be what you wanted to hear in terms of how do I list those things. You can list them, okay? But I will say that hard skills do get more of a look when it comes to the LinkedIn profiles and the resumes, and that's what recruiters are looking for the most part. Maybe also too on a LinkedIn profile, maybe you work more on asking for recommendations, and people do read those things, right? Like I don't know if people ask for recommendations as much or references as much anymore on applications. Possibly they do, but nowadays with LinkedIn, if you have a lot of recommendations, they can just scroll down and see those things. And a lot of times, the things that people say about you, just like when you say about people that you really respect, or if you leave a recommendation, most of those qualities are really soft skills, right? So there's other ways to sort of weave that in, but I would say the resume, they do front load on hard skills more. It's more the soft skills happen more in the interview, in the communication, and eventually like on the job. Those are things that actually, to me, are really things that help you get promoted. Any other questions? No more questions. Okay. Well, I'm going to just sort of wrap things up. I just want to thank you guys all for joining us. I know that some of you may not be able to see us live, but you're going to be able to see this later on a stream. But I hope that you understand now that if soft skills was something that you sort of heard about but didn't know about, you have a better understanding about it. I hope that this is just sort of the introduction to soft skills, that you now know a little bit more about it. And even if you feel like you're not at the level you want to be at, you have the time and the opportunity to get better at that. And so try to implement these things like communication, leadership, and emotional intelligence, because these are things that are going to help you in the long run. These are the things that are going to benefit your career. And these are the things that are going to help you develop your leadership ability. So thanks so much for joining us, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.